they have been abandoned, the state has failed to do its moral duty.
What do we do with a complex of buildings filled with memories and history, but at that point had already been abandoned for 30 years?
They're really intrigued with these places that are spooky and interesting. So many of them got interested in the history.
You know, it's not forgotten, it's there. You know exactly what happened.
When an old structure is demolished, people almost universally say, oh, what a shame, too bad. Too bad they couldn't think of a way to do it.
Most people who call themselves preservationists suffer from the disease of eternal optimism. Certainly someone's going to do something to save these buildings. There's worth here, and someone's going to intervene at some point.
Urban exploring is the act of infiltrating places where you're not supposed to be.
I would explain it as going into abandonment, stuff that normal people don't see every day, and taking pictures or videotaping and just exploring stuff that, you know, the normal eye doesn't see.
That's what it is to me, is basically being in places that others won't go and few people will see, that are beautiful and need to be seen by people, but just paying attention to your area around you and literally exploring your surroundings.
A lot of people consider it abandoned buildings, but there's a lot more to it. Rooftops, active stuff, basically anywhere that you are not allowed to be, and seeing where you're not supposed to be in the unknown. It's not about photography or abandoned buildings or any one thing in particular, it's just curiosity, basically.
To be super vague and confusing, I think urban exploring is kind of grasping at straws, you know? It's trying to find what's so appealing about abandoned shit to people, because like, people have loved ruins for many thousands of years. You know, everyone's always fascinated by whatever was left behind by the people who came before us. But I feel like the people who take this on and do this as a hobby, like, are trying to figure out why we're so enthralled with it.
So I didn't know it was actually called, urban exploration until really recently. So it was just always part of what I did.
People have been doing it forever. 100 years ago, when the New York City subway opened, like the day that it opened, they caught somebody trespassing in the tunnels. That's why urban is part of the term. It wasn't meant to be just abandoned buildings. There's people exploring active rooftops, drains, sewers, subway tunnels, climbing bridges, really just exploring man-made infrastructure in places that you're not supposed to go.
The active sites are definitely a big part of urban exploring, but it seems most people are focused on the forgotten and vacant buildings.
By far, probably 90% of the people that do it only do abandoned buildings.
I remember when I was probably 15, the grocery store across the street from my parents' house went belly up, and we built a skate park in there, and I spent the summer of 8th and 9th grade playing in an empty supermarket. So I've always been into going into those sort of places that nobody else was really supposed to go.
Been so many places I've actually lost count,
Not a whole lot, maybe I'd say maybe 30, 40.
Yeah, I'd say a good 100, if not more.
Probably at least 30 state hospitals, 40, 50 if you general hospitals, maybe a dozen or so industrial places, power plants.
Not including repeats?
Yeah.
There's so many abandonments in this city, it just all runs together after a while. schools are always fun, either hotels or industrial sites.
Hospitals.
And power plants.
We do like prisons.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I think the houses mainly because of the kind of the feeling you get there that somebody lived there for, generations.
I personally like industrial places. How they decay, you have a lot of metal, you have a lot of concrete, stuff grows well in those environments. So you get a kind of unique, interesting decay in industrial abandonments that I particularly enjoy.
Most people just pass them right by and think it's their eyesores more than anything. But I feel like explorers really are, like, hyper aware of everything around us. Whereas most people just sort of drive and are just completely oblivious to everything that's passing them by. They're just thinking about themselves or their lives or whatever, but that really is what it's about, is like paying closer attention to the things that are around you and enjoying them and appreciating them.
A lot of people don't see past its present state. They see something that's a shambles, it's no good, it's not doing anybody any good in the state that it's in, and fail to see what it was or what it could be. It's amazing how fast the structure deteriorates through disuse. There's a process known as demolition by neglect, and the longer they sit there unused, unmaintained, the less value they have.
When I pass them, I always wonder what the future holds for those old buildings. But I hope they're able to be saved as something so that the place is still remembered as what it once was.
We're trying to accomplish the memorialization, the memory, so that we never forget what happened and what we did.
Preservation to me is very closely linked to the idea of remembering our past and informing our present day decisions with the benefit of our forebears' experience.
I see places pretty regularly that say something to a generation of people about both their parents and also about their kids, like, where have you been, where are we going to go?
This facility is an old abandoned tuberculosis facility for blacks that was built probably 100 years ago.
This penitentiary had running water, it had central heat before the White House had either one of those things.
Thousands of people created tens of thousands of patents over here that changed the way we live today.
In World War II, they promised Franklin Roosevelt, our president, that they would build a ship a day for the war effort, and everybody thought they were just kind of bragging, and it turned out they actually exceeded that number.
It's considered a nautical landmark. People use that for navigating when they bring their boats into the harbor.
It was the idea of agrarian, self-sufficient communities. And we built about 293 of them, all with absolutely the best intentions. It's the best we knew how to do.
These are some of the sights and sounds of Pennhurst, the state institution for the mentally retarded. We entitle our investigative report, Suffer the Little Children. Pennhurst was first opened 60 years ago when the answers to the problem of mental retardation were considered to be segregation and sterilization. Sterilization, of course, is a thing of the past, but the archaic practices of segregation and custodial care are still with us, and seemingly with the approval of society. What would you like? If I can give you anything in the world, what would you want?
I'd like to get out of Pennhurst.
Pennhurst exists in this kind of limbo zone where you don't want to remember it, but you don't want to forget it. And that makes it really difficult to talk about the real history of the place. Most people who call themselves preservationists suffer from a disease of eternal optimism. You know, you go there and you watch the decay, but you're like, certainly someone's going to do something to save these buildings. There's certainly a worth here, and someone's going to intervene at some point. My grandfather's girlfriend knew of Pennhurst and lives near there. And there were a number of sites that she was instrumental in pointing out to me that are really cool. Urban exploration, I guess, is what they call it now, but nobody was calling it that at the time. It was only many years later that I began to piece together the story that was laid on that place and why that was so important.
In the mid-1950s, over 500,000 Americans were locked up in insane asylums. Psychosurgeries, now rejected by modern science, like the lobotomy, electroshock therapy, and insulin comas, were commonly practiced on patients against their will. Pennhurst State School and Hospital was the epicenter for shutting down these institutions. Court cases initiated by Pennhurst are the reason why children with Down syndrome and other intellectual disabilities are allowed to attend our country's public schools today.
I had no idea that anywhere in this country we treated people like what I saw.
I looked around and said, half these people don't belong here.
80 children, 80. All in cages, literally. It's not that they were in cribs, they were cages.
Pennhurst was designed to segregate people with intellectual disability. That's what it was for. And it did. And it was wrong.
You go back into the history of institutions, and the first thing that happened with people was the decision that they're not us, they're them. And once you make that determination, then you can justify anything.
There is no reason in this day and age, with federal funds available, for such a place to exist.
The sickening and almost unviewable conditions of the institution is largely due to overcrowding and the lack of personnel to provide elementary care. In many cases, children churn in their own filth for only one reason: lack of assistance. The ones that speak detest the inhumane conditions and hunger for the slightest sign of affection.
The story that Pennhurst has to tell, in fact, the movement of which Pennhurst really was the epicenter, is much larger than the Pennhurst campus and much larger than Spring City, Pennsylvania, or even Pennsylvania itself.
Going to Pennhurst early kind of showed how deep the rabbit hole goes in terms of urban exploring.
The first time I went to Pennhurst, I think I was impressed by just the overgrowth. Nobody had mowed the grass in 20 years.
It was probably about 2006 that I went, and I heard about it from a kid in school, and he said, hey, there's this cool abandoned hospital, and at that point I was into, urban exploring already.
Through the trees you would see the buildings. And the vultures, that's something I remember about Pennhurst. It seemed like the vultures were just nesting now in the tops of all the buildings, and they were constantly circling. And the power plant, the nuclear power plant from across the river, just the steam was constantly drifting over top at Pennhurst.
It was definitely after the first experience that I went back, and now that I had gotten a little taste of it, I wanted to know more.
After I went there once, I was kind of more interested about the history of the buildings, and and then I watched, there was a few news documentaries about how they treated the mentally ill, back in the 60s and 70s, and it's kind of brought the change to how we treat them today.
I don't think it was the first time we went to Pennhurst, but it was one of the early times. I think the first time we got past that initial building, I believe we entered in the basement, and right there I still have the picture I took on my really old crappy digital camera of a prosthetic leg for a child. And I think that was one of the defining moments, one of the, I can remember that picture very specifically because that was kind of the first time urban exploring hit home to me.
The concept of exploring an urban environment has a long history, but the term urban exploration is relatively new. It is believed that urban exploring was first defined by the late Ninjalicious in 1996. With the advent of the internet, explorers were given the ability to connect worldwide and share stories, locations, and photographs. Due to the illegal nature of urban exploration, most people use pseudonyms and are often wary of sharing information with outsiders. Once a mutual trust is established, many plan group events and meetups through these online communities, forums, and photo-sharing networks.
It definitely blows me away that the community is as strong as it is, and as big as it is, and I think it's great.
Have you met up with anyone from online?
Yes, I have. Many in North Carolina. There's a good urban exploration community there. With urban exploration, you really have to trust people. You know, somebody asks you, well, where's this location? But a lot of these places are very precious, and you don't want to get them run down. You don't want people to get trespassing charges and whatnot. So you just have to be very careful about who you give the information to.
I was hanging out with one of my legitimate photography buddies, and he's like, let me get this straight. I've never met these guys. You're meeting them at 6 o'clock in the morning under a bridge, and you're going into an abandoned building. I'm like, yeah, because, dude, what are you doing?
I originally got into photography, and then I started hearing about people talking about different places. And that's when I started researching it on the internet, and I saw how many were in Maryland alone. I said, wow, you know, Maryland's full of them.
Do you guys see yourself doing this for a lot longer?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Sometimes I say I'll quit, especially when I get in trouble or have some crazy run-ins. But I can't see myself doing anything else but this.
If you really want to make the most of exploring, you have to put yourself out there. Be willing to travel and meet up with people outside of your area.
It's adventurous. It's really neat to see these places and then go back and research them to see how they looked when they were brand new, and I always kind of wonder why they became abandoned. I enjoy it.
It really only takes a sort of one common bond between people that have never met. One sort of shared interest can really, really go a long way.
I love the rush of it, the thrill of going somewhere and being places that not many people have seen or not many people experience for themselves.
There's a lot of aspects that I put myself through that sometimes I question, but I always, at the end, am like, it was totally worth it. It's always worth it.
Yeah. We just got in.
I started here in 1965 as a summer student. My father had spent 42 years in his plant, and he wanted to make sure his kid didn't. You know what I mean? In '77, I left teaching and came back full-time. I've been here ever since. Can't describe them to someone who's never been there. And how do you describe standing on a blast furnace gas floor when the drill goes in and they tap the furnace? How do I explain that to you? When molten iron comes bailing out. Can't explain that to you.
Can you still hear that when you walk around the area?
Sure, you can feel the, well, figuratively speaking, feel the heat. See the iron oxide and the kish floating through the air. Hear the roar of the furnace. I can't explain that to anybody. That will go with me.
Do you have any other memories from working there that have stuck with you?
One of the jobs when you're a safety engineer is to do the Widow Brown call. This is when there's a fatality in the plant, and it's your job to go and tell the wife. Here's a young fella driving down around Forge 3. The forklift tipped over, and the cage caught him right over the throat. 2 young kids at home, wife was out, took the kids to the doctor. The entire neighborhood knew why I was sitting there. They know. They were good. They were actually very helpful. Stayed out of the way until I had to do what I did, and then they came in with the minister and dealt with it from there. Very sad when they're young children. one of the other experiences working in a steel mill.
To me, one of the sadder places to me is actually industrial places like Bethlehem Steel and big industry, because that shows the whole decline of all this industry that we used to have, and now it's just gone.
I always think, like, you know, it may be an empty shell now, but it was full of people and experiences years before it.
I worked there for many years. Intense memories. I worked very hard. I made a lot of friends that I still keep in contact today. We turned the corner onto the property, past the large water tower, transistor-shaped water tower, and the lawn goes for half a mile, and you see something. It's not clear what it is, but you see this almost mirage rising out of the ground. And as we got closer, I saw that it was a building about a quarter mile across, 5 stories high, with all glass in the front. And I said, wow. We went into the front door. I looked up and I remember saying, I don't know who these people are, I don't know what they're doing, but it must be important to be in a building like this. I interviewed there, I was offered a job, and I started work there in 1973.
Occupying the entire first floor of Building 3 at the Homedale Laboratories, the Computer Center requires some 20,000 square feet of space to house its equipment and peripheral services.
So it's not just the ordinary emotional experience of starting your new job and your new career and all of that, but you're doing it in a magnificently designed building that's known as one of the premier research centers in the world. So I still have that emotional attachment today. This tower, it was designed to look like a transistor, which of course was invented in the labs in 1948. At the time, a transistor was a blob with 3 wires coming out of it, and that would be instantly recognizable to anybody doing electronic work. I may have taken a wrong road here.
I worked here for many, many years. These are documentary filmmakers. They simply wanted to capture.
Just get the building in the background and have him talking.
I really would rather that you not do that. Because technically you're trespassing, and in order to do anything, you gotta have permission. You're very strict about that.
Okay.
Okay?
You always hear stories about people getting fines and caught by the cops, getting arrested. And then there's this other aspect to it of danger.
Abandoned buildings, falling through the floor, running into people in the building that don't want you there, homeless people, scrappers that are stealing copper will get territorial.
I've seen entire places where entire floors at a time have just been collapsed.
Some urban explorers are pretty adventurous in where they go and the chances that they take. There are places that just aren't safe to go.
It should be off limits, because if you don't know what you're doing, it is dangerous.
From a law point of view, they're just trying to make sure people don't get hurt or sue or anything like that.
Dude, I think the cops freaking came in and got them.
Yeah, we were all called, they got him.
Dude, that was crazy.
Nuh-uh.
Dude, right on.
Hands up!
Hands up! Hands up! We can see it!
I was like, okay.
Kind of looking around, looking for the bowling alley in here, and out of nowhere we hear the cop just yell, "Put your hands where I can see them!" And we all kind of got pretty frantic.
I looked down the stairwell to this.
Yeah, I looked down and I see a gun in my face, and I'm like, oh my god, this is bad.
Never had a gun pulled on me, that's a first.
Can you explain why we're all whispering?
There's security walking around outside in the hospital we're currently at.
We got caught on Sunday, and we had court the next morning, which sucked because we all had to call out of work.
It sounded like security. We could hear their radios, we heard their car doors. They walked right into the room with us. Were shining their lights right over that wooden wall that we were hiding behind. And we just outweighted them.
We heard sounds and saw lights, and we ducked behind this little wall. So we were there for, it must have been 2 hours. And all you could hear is like drip, drip. Everybody was terrified to even move. We did not want to get caught there.
6 of us got arrested, and it was funny because we're all from everywhere. There was like 3 from Pennsylvania, 1 from Georgia, 1 from South Carolina, and 1 from Maryland. They're like, oh my God, what is this all about?
So they actually put you in the back of the car and took you in?
Yep, I even got held in the suicide cell.
And I mean, just out of nowhere, an SUV pulls up and a woman starts yelling. The first thing she said was, "You're trespassing. You're not supposed to be here." And then she said, "Did you come to the woods? Did you come to the woods?"
We saw them patrolling around, and we took the tunnels out to the power plant and ran out into the woods and came out in the woods, and that's where they caught us. So we said that we weren't in the building, we were outside, and they had no proof of us inside because we had stashed the memory cards in my bra. So we just got a minor trespassing fee and not breaking in, entering, or any of that. So we just got $50 fee, and that was it.
So what? Like, we are gone now. They can write us letters or tell anybody they want to. They would never have any proof that we were there unless they, saw our photographs that we're going to put on the internet.
Photography and exploring for me goes hand in hand because I like capturing when I'm in a place. I like to take pictures everywhere I go so then when I can look back. If I ever didn't have my camera on me or if it was broken, I would still explore, but I always make sure to have my camera with me.
Yeah, well, like I said, I was a photographer since I was 10 years old. My dad was a photographer. I always took pictures.
So you're very familiar with the mechanics and, how film works and everything.
Yeah, I have the darkroom set up here. I develop my own film. I shoot a mix of film and digital. I used to have the RB67. It was bigger than some of the entrances to the hospital sometimes. It's like it can't fit my camera through the window.
When I usually first get in a building, I usually just take it in. I walk around, look around first, and then I take my camera out and photograph it. I feel like the pictures are just a reminder when I'm done of the building that I was in.
I just like to capture things as they are, and then go back years from now and look at them. It's just so neat to go back. It brings back so much memories and stuff. And with the hospitals and all, 100 years from now, maybe our pictures are still floating around the internet and people can look at them and say, wow, that was really cool. I didn't know they had those kind of hospitals back then.
There's a ton of explorers out there taking pictures. I know some of them actually make prints and exhibit them at shows, and some are actually publishing books too, but most of these photos are just sitting on hard drives right now, just waiting to be discovered.
On my Flickr, I have at least 200 pictures, which, I total I have 800, but I have at least 200 pictures, which I am extremely proud of on there, which I think are great high quality photos, but it's what do I do with them,
This is a horror themed convention and I'm selling my urban exploration photography. I figured it's the right type of crowd, people that like the weird, the unusual, so my photography fits along that. Photograph abandoned asylums. A lot of people ask, are these legal permission pictures? And it's kind of awkward, so no, not really. I think that's why people like connecting to it, because it's something they haven't seen normally in the stores, and when they see something different, they like to hear the history about it, and I have a lot of history on all the places I go, so I like to share it with the people when they buy a print.
Do you think you'll continue doing stuff like this?
Yeah, it's a good way to fuel my exploring habits.
and sat down on that plank you're standing on.
Right here?
Yeah. Can you reach that one?
There's some places that are so highly secured that you really just can't get inside and see. So sometimes the only way to get in and see a place is through private access or paid tours.
My name is Ralph Zucker. I am the president of Somerset Development. We've been working on rezoning the site for almost 7 years.
You ready to go?
Let's do it.
So it's different to see this open and blank, and to see some of the key architectural features, which was the fountain and the gardens and just the unity of the area, different. But I presume the architect has a plan for it.
Well, when I first saw the building, it was still populated. People were working here. I really did not grasp the building at that time. I walked through it, left, just thought that this was not for us. The first time it grabbed me was many years later, and walking into the building vacant was very significant to us.
But it's just row after row of these same kind of offices here. And you know, none of the offices had windows, except that anybody could walk out here. And everybody had a window.
And I think the majority of the community is feeling, I don't know if it's a sense of relief or feeling pleased that the building is being repopulated and being brought back to life, especially the people in the community who worked in this building or who had their family who have history in this building. With a lot of people here who have a big part of their life, spent a big part of their life in this building.
Hey Lee, what's it like being on the roof of Bell Labs?
This is the greatest thing. I've never been here. You can see all the antennas, you can see the tower, you can see the whole building here. You can see it's a very active area, even though other places just have a roof, this one has an electric roof. It's really cool. Really cool.
The history of the building is huge. The fact that thousands of people worked here, this is a monument not just to obviously Bell Labs, but to American ingenuity in general. So we've always designed the future of this building with an eye on the past, and everything that happened here plays in what we're planning to do.
As much of the building should remain as possible for its historic value, but certainly it's going to change. It'll never go back to its use. It'll evolve into something new, hopefully keeping the historic structure as close as they can to the original.
They've already put up a casino, which is the second most successful in Pennsylvania. They opened the hotel about a year ago. They opened an outlet mall, which is just about filled up.
There was a lot of opposition to a casino. Crime's going to go up, prostitution's going to do well. All the arguments you would hear, not in my backyard. But without the sands, there would not have been the engine to drive the redevelopment. That's what will drive this redevelopment. This is evolving into the next phase, the use of the property. Nothing lasts forever. The older you get, you begin to realize that. So it's simply evolving from what it was to something productive again.
Yeah, that's still making noise, huh? That clangy noise. That's sort of like, it brings back memories of being here. You know, that's the sound of wind and the sound of metal clanging around. The first time I came to Bethlehem Steel was December 31st, 2003. It was the first place I ever tried to be a photographer at. I used to be a painter. So I spent pretty much the whole day exploring it. It was fairly open at that time. There was nobody here whatsoever. It reminded me of one of those last person on Earth episodes of The Twilight Zone. You know, it's just so spooky and so solitary. It was a little bit like being a scuba diver and exploring the wreck of a sunken battleship. You know, it was just this massive, derelict structure. And you know, from an urban explorer photographer's point of view, there was just no bad angle in here. It's the most visually epic place, you know, that an urban explorer could really hope to explore. After I explored it in 2003, I heard on the radio that Bethlehem Steel had dissolved and that they were going to demolish these buildings. That's why I was in a rush to come back and photograph it as often as possible. I came back about 10 more times, and every time I came back, I was thinking this could be the last time I ever see it. You know, I would leave Bethlehem, I would see the blast furnaces in the horizon, I'd be like, this could be the last time I'm ever seeing this view. I kept thinking that. So I'm surprised that 13 years later, here I am, and it's still more or less intact. To me, this means that the casino is serious about letting people get up close and personal with these blast furnaces. It is an important part of history that not a lot of people understand. And again, I think you get so much from being up close and personal to a place like this than you would ever get from, you know, looking at fragments of it in cases in a museum.
A lot of the historical buildings I feel like should be preserved and kept around rather than left to rot and then usually ended up knocked down anyway.
Some places have been turned into college campuses.
Gut it and make it into an office building or a private school. If the structure can be saved, I think that they should allow access to the buildings, charge people money, use that money to repurpose or you know, repair the buildings if they can, and let people learn about them.
Eastern State Penitentiary was, in its day, the most famous and influential prison in the world. It was built with the belief that people are inherently good. And so if left in silence and contemplation, prisoners would look into their hearts and they would become penitent. It's the root of the word penitentiary. That focus on solitary confinement forced them to build a revolutionary floor plan. There's a central surveillance hub, and there are 7 wings that radiated out like the spokes from a wheel. From that one spot, an officer could turn and see down every hallway. Americans argued over what kind of prison system they wanted, and this was one of the flagship places where that argument expressed itself in architecture. We want to return the site to that. We want people to come here and to think about the future of American prisons, talk about the current state of prisons, and really think about what we're trying to accomplish and if we're being successful. One of the things I've always found interesting was that the way the building got saved and opened to the public was through Halloween tours. People assume the Halloween tours were a late addition for us to make money, but in fact the Halloween tours predate our regular historic site tours. In the early days, those Halloween tours were very simple and we would make a couple $1,000s, but today they really are the lifeblood of the organization that allows us to put multi-million-dollar roofing projects in place, that allows us to be open 7 days a week, even when there's not much audience during the winter, They really allow us to run the site the way we want to see the site run.
Certainly, we can't say that the haunted attraction doesn't touch upon what happened there. Whether you want to use the word exploit or not really depends upon whether you think it's a good idea to have it there or not.
So I went, and I saw firsthand that it's stuff that I really, I didn't like it.
I think that it only makes sense. Pennhurst has got an amazing mystique. When you walk into the abandoned Pennhurst campus, before the sun rises, it really is the scariest place on earth.
I don't mind it because the buildings are still being used. There's a lot of history at Pennhurst too, but at least the buildings are being used and they're not decaying away. That's how I look at it.
With the haunted house's help, we've preserved and cleaned 4 buildings, and we hopefully will be on our way to doing more.
I'm Timothy Smith. I'm the president of Pennhurst Paranormal Association. I'm in charge of running all the paranormal events and the photography and things like that, plus just making sure the buildings are maintained.
I got back to the campus a number of times over the first few years after it closed and watched it deteriorate and watched the trees grow up.
I don't think that there was just many years left for Pennhurst in the state that it was in. It was falling apart hard and fast. I think that the haunted house has slowed that because they have an interest in keeping some of those buildings stable.
A lot of this is made possible by a haunted house business that only runs for about 7 to 8 weeks. The idea would be to save as many buildings as possible, keep the beauty and the integrity of the place so that more people can embrace it from its historical standpoint, from its paranormal standpoint, and the haunted house standpoint.
I became familiar with Pennhurst history by visiting it, by being present there. And I think that's going to help other people understand these places better too, is if you can go there and you can experience being there is so much more powerful and so much more meaningful.
I've had people go for a ghost hunt that don't believe in ghosts, but they just want to wander off in the building away from the ghost hunters so that they can take nighttime pictures inside. You have people that don't even care about the paranormal or care about the photography, but they'll walk in just so that they can be in a place that was that important to, mainstreaming special ed even.
It's to all of our benefit to understand our past, understand our history, and structures like this make it real in a way that reading about it simply cannot.
There are so many different ways that people can respond to the building. Some people are just so moved by how beautiful it is.
They're really intrigued with these places that are spooky and interesting, and so many of them got interested in the history.
I think a lot of the same people who want to go in these structures in their dilapidated state are the same people who would love to see them preserved.
Being inside one of these buildings with so much history definitely gives you a deeper appreciation of things. It's as if you're being transported to another time and place.
It looked like everybody went to lunch and didn't come back. There literally were papers sitting on desks, pencils and all, and people just stopped being there.
Who knows what you're going to stumble upon. Some of these places, there's still patient records lying around, pictures, personal belongings.
But then also like the clothing, there will be some rooms with like nightgowns and those kind of things.
I found a shank at the prison. Like a legit shank.
I'm obsessed with all medical things, like tables, gurneys, wheelchairs.
This is an old antique surgical kit.
Syringes, chemicals that are still in the glass containers.
Record books, war journals, all that stuff's interesting to find.
Some of these places look like they just up and left. So when you're walking around, you're bound to find some of the things that made their history so disturbing.
Well, one of the things I really found interesting was there's an entire room stacked to the ceiling with all the patient records from all the years. That always really shocks me that, those are all the people that were in there and they never destroyed the files or got rid of them. They just threw them in that room and locked it up. to, rot away.
Some of these, like when you read, it's how many bad things can they say about one person? They are violent, combative, destructive, abusive, noisy, profane, vulgar, incoherent, irrational, unkempt, and unclean.
There's rooms that are like children's playrooms, and they'll actually have toys and paintings on the walls. And then there's another room right next door that has prosthetic legs and child-sized wheelchairs. As a whole, you're putting all these contrasting areas together, and it turns out to be a big picture that I never would have seen.
Many of the things these folks find are places that the rest of us just wouldn't see and don't know are there. And if it wasn't for their recordation of these places, we wouldn't have any recording. So most of the things that urban explorers are going to explore and take pictures of will never be recorded in any other fashion. So, I'm so incredibly thankful for the work that they do.
Each place that we go to is unique. It has its own personality that can be captured.
It's classic architecture. When it's gone, it'll be gone forever. And if you don't take pictures of it, no one's going to remember it was here. So, as long as you keep this stuff going, this history will live forever, at least in pixels.
I mean, the photography, it's like, you have the time from when the building closes to the time that it's either torn down or the elements take it down. And the photography is just trying to capture what's in between there.
I think it's probably naive to say that, nothing should ever be torn down.
Some things are worth saving, but everything's not worth saving.
Sometimes I almost feel like it's merciful when it's gotten to a certain point. But it's inevitable. I think it's picking your battles.
Certainly, there are some buildings that are beyond repair. And when you go to Henryton, you'll see just what happens when properties are not maintained or looked after in any capacity.
So, what was the main reason for putting all of your time and effort into making this book?
To preserve history. All the money made went to donating copies to the local library and the state of Maryland and the workers that worked here. Three years of fun here and taking pictures. And I've been in every building, every room. We have pictures of it.
I know it started out as a tuberculosis hospital for the African Americans, and then once tuberculosis wasn't as bad as it was, they turned it over into a hospital for the mentally challenged, I guess you could say.
It was very hard because I had to do it all myself through Microsoft Word, and I didn't have any help or any fancy programs like everybody has. I ended up making it mostly a picture book with history. My husband took this picture. I love it.
Where did you first hear about Henryton?
On the internet, researching abandoned places. And I came across some pictures for Henryton. And it looked interesting.
A number of years ago when I first got in office, I came to visit, and we believed that at that point there were some buildings on the property that could have been renovated and could have been refurbished. In the meantime, every square inch of these buildings has been vandalized. Every piece of metal has been stripped from the buildings inside and out. So over the years, last few years, we've had some very, very serious fires that have been set. So it became a public nuisance for our firefighters. And the buildings then became not structurally sound because of the fires and the water damage. We decided to abandon the idea of renovation because the buildings were not suitable for renovation anymore. We started working on how do we get them demolished.
When an old structure is demolished, people almost universally say, oh, what a shame. Too bad. Too bad they couldn't think of a way to do it.
The question of what to do with these dinosaurs is a question that's been preoccupying the development community and the real estate community for quite some time.
What do we do with a complex of buildings filled with memories and history, but it's so unwieldy? At that point, it had already been abandoned for 30 years.
It's hard for me to be explicit about what the value is of preserving something with that heritage, but I have a sense that it has a value.
Back here on the island, some folks in the North Shore may have heard an explosion and some rumbling today, but it was not an earthquake.
No, it was a demolition crew bringing down something that has been part of the Long Island landscape for decades.
The towering smokestack on the grounds of the former Kings Park Psychiatric Center has for decades served as a guidepost for countless Long Islanders.
They're just chipping away at it little by little. The people that think it's an eyesore don't even notice that they're gone. And historically, it chips away at the place as a whole. I grew up next to Kings Park, and I'd see all these buildings on the way to my friend's house, and it was really just a curiosity of, I see this all the time and I want to know what's in there. I was always a photographer, but I didn't really make the connection of, oh, take nice pictures in the buildings. It was just, I want to know what's in there. And then once I got in, of course, I took pictures so I could look back at it, and then I started realizing you could actually take, like, nice artistic pictures in there.
Are hospitals and institutions your favorite place?
Yeah, I have a lot of personal connection to the hospitals, things I've been through, friends of mine have been to, where it's more than just an abandoned building. There's actually like a personal connection there, and interest in it. It's the 11th annual report of the Kings Park State Hospital to the State Commission in Lunacy for the year 1906. Causes of people being admitted: adverse conditions, mental strain, religious excitements, love affairs, including seduction, fright and nervous shock, intemperance, sexual excess, masturbation, sunstroke, accident, pregnancy, change of life, fevers, epilepsy, diseases of the skull, old age, epidemic influenza, abuse of drugs, unascertained, and then finally, not insane. 4 people were admitted.
And what was the purpose of Kings Park at this time?
It was pretty much just a place to put anyone who didn't have a place in society, who wasn't wanted in society. I've heard often more people there were not mentally ill than the people who were, people that just had nowhere to go.
So it just became an outlet for social rejects, essentially.
Anyone who had nowhere to go, no place in society, they didn't want them, they were just put there, so society didn't have to deal with them or see them. It was a warehouse for unwanted people. I was looking through this file and came across this page. Operative record, diagnosed with schizophrenia, operation was a prefrontal lobotomy, and guided by Dr. Walter Freeman, who was the doctor who actually invented the concept of the lobotomy.
The electrodes are applied and the first shock is given. He drives a point through the orbital plate and at a depth of 5 centimeters swings the handle far laterally. and then to sever those to the base of the frontal lobe by elevating the handle of the instrument.
When I'm inside a building and looking at these specific things, my mind tends to try and paint a picture as to what was going on in that time. And not just a what, but who, and who the people were and what they were doing. That's why one of the most interesting things we find are records with people's names on them or reports of incidents, because that brings out the real story of that time.
It's also like just a really surreal experience, you know. You're just out doing this thing in this place which like seems dead, but it's totally not, you know. There's totally a lot of life left in there. So it's there's a lot of thoughts running through my head when I'm in abandoned places. It's kind of hard to lump it all into one thing though.
It's kind of like a double-edged thing to me where I enjoy it, but at the same time, sometimes it'll actually get to me and upset me a little, because it's not just like an abandoned building and, oh yeah, people used to be here who went through this. It's like, I know people who are going through this now, so it's a little bit different for me than it is for a lot of people.
I've learned firsthand how I felt to be in an institution. I don't think anybody on the outside world knows how anybody feels with a disability that goes into an institution. I don't think they have any general idea. I mean, they see it on TV, they see it from the news, but they don't have a general idea offhand how it really feels to be locked up in a prison like that. It was just not where I wanted to be. I wanted to be with my family, I wanted to be with my brothers and sisters, I wanted to be with normal people to live a normal life.
You know, I would imagine that they thought they were doing some good, and probably at the time they were. But as time went on, I think they became more and more callous.
I saw staff tie up somebody in a chair. I see staff, you know, taking belts and hit people on the legs and on the bodies. I saw a lot of that stuff happening.
Hey, these people can't be helped, so we're just going to warehouse them. And we're just going to do our day-to-day things, and nothing's going to improve, and nobody's going to care because nobody knows.
We have a special report now on how a series of investigative reports by NBC 10's Bill Baldini 3 decades ago helped spark dramatic changes in the care of the mentally disabled.
First of all, I got a very good crew, and we went up there, and I had to prepare them for what they were going to see. And these guys were tough guys, but even they were stunned.
During the next 4 evenings, TV 10 will delve into the problems of Pennhurst. We hope to find out why the current conditions exist. What are the problems facing the people running the institution? What has been accomplished in the past? And what must be done to correct the injustices the mentally retarded have endured much, much too long?
Pennhurst was designed to segregate people with intellectual disability. That's what it was for. And it did. And it was wrong.
Some were sitting there, half naked or naked, banging their heads against the wall, bleeding. Others sit there in a catatonic state, just staring out the window.
I had no idea that anywhere in this country we treated people like what I saw. I walked into a unit with about 50 people, mostly naked, mostly screaming, a lot of them self-stimulating, hitting themselves and hitting others. A couple of nurses and professional staff isolated in a glass booth, just watching the chaos outside. And describing that is, I'm just overwhelmed with the thinking that we ever did that to people.
I mean, think about those poor parents back in the 30s, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s even, when they go to their doctor and they have this infant and they know there's something wrong, but they don't know exactly what's wrong. And their doctor tells them, there's nothing they can do for little Tommy or Mary Jane, so put them in Pennhurst. Imagine the parent who is faced with that choice, who has several other children, and has to abandon the weakest child, and the guilt that they probably feel years later. when they find out, hey, there's something that could have been done. Maybe I should have kept him or her. Maybe I should have visited more. Must be an awful feeling.
Families didn't know what to do. We as a society didn't give them any help in their homes. And we told them, guys like me with PhDs and MDs, we told them, Pennhurst is the best thing you can do. And they did, by the hundreds of thousands.
Pennhurst exists in this kind of limbo zone where you don't want to remember it, but you don't want to forget it. And that makes it really difficult to talk about the real history of the place.
A structure can be given a new purpose and still retain its history. A place's history doesn't go away because it's used in a new way.
We always admit that there's a bit of an ethical dilemma, that it's not ideal to turn a National Historic Landmark into an entertainment space. But we think that's part of taking it seriously, to admit that it's troubling.
I have a lot of close friends that have serious mental illness, and it really offends me what they do there.
We were very disappointed when it opened, and it was all there. You know, the people with electroshock and wheelchairs everywhere, and head bandages and psychosurgery depictions.
People try so hard to fight that stigma of how mentally ill people are not dangerous and they're not what people make them out to be, and stuff like that just does so much damage to that, and it's counterproductive to everything that needs to be done to help the mentally ill.
You know, if this is really the last use of those buildings before we build a Target or we build McMansions or whatever else happens up there, then I think that is a pretty sad commentary, because it means that 90% of the people, the only way they're going to know Pennhurst and understand Pennhurst is as a haunted house.
The controversy around the Pennhurst haunt is legitimate. People feel like these places need to be treated sensitively. However, they are also falling apart rapidly. They require enormous amounts of capital. So I do believe, if not for the haunt, that probably the structures would have completely collapsed or been demolished by now.
There's something about a physical structure or a physical object that literally makes history real.
Those who want to help aren't allowed to. And so they just kind of throw their arms up in despair, and it's history fading fast.
It's kind of stupid. 115-year-old building. It's getting knocked down to probably like a Target, Walmart.
A fire which really was quite a scene, ripped right through the old school on the corner of 7th and Lehigh.
Firefighters were concerned about the possible collapse there, so they decided to let the building burn. Fortunately, no one was injured.
It's sad to see any building go that's got a lot of history. But as far as the condition that it was in, it's a good thing they're doing it.
3 more structures at the former psychiatric center are scheduled to be torn down to make way for redevelopment.
I like the before and after pictures. That's my favorite part, because I can't believe that that was there one day and the next day it's just totally gone.
But yeah, this is the only wall that's left. This is behind where the children's building was. Each piece is from one of the buildings that were here. This is actually a piece from the White Building. As soon as you walked in, it looked like a church. And the slate that we have here is from the roof. But, yep, this is kind of like a closure for us. This is the end. It's been a good journey.
I really hate to see that, especially with the old asylums. Like that really gets to me. I volunteer for the Special Olympics and I do that sort of thing, and like I don't know, I just hate seeing those places taken away, knowing what they have done and the history behind them. I hate it.
They just change all the time. They fall apart, people steal things. You're preserving a moment in history that's very fleeting.
You can document the history of a place, and in 10 years that this place is torn down, that's the only pictures we have of it.
You can go through and just see what was going on at that time, when you can just kind of piece things together with what you find. And it's just like taking a step back into history, taking a step back in time.
It's interesting to me that it's the people who actually worked there or visited there or were neighbors, they're the people who are more likely to advocate for its preservation. It's the people who didn't have anything to do with it and are maybe a little scared of it, who are the ones who are more likely to say, we should just get rid of that thing. It's bad, there's bad history, stigma, scandal, all that stuff. If you think that the history of this or any other place is bad, that's really the best reason of all to preserve it.
Well, that's the way it is. Worked here more than 20 years. Sometimes laughter, sometimes tears. No air condition, hot as hell. Wonder how I stood the smell. Working short with scarce supplies. Supervisors telling lies. Grades are frozen, rules unfair. A promise here, a promise there. The parking lot is way too small. No light at night and I could fall. Ceilings leaking, cracking walls. And when it rains, it floods the halls. Flies and roaches everywhere. When I complain, I get nowhere. We take chances every day. Boy, do we rate hazard pay. Fight that parkway, rain or snow. Why don't I quit this carnival show? Because I realize what it means to have the dough for pork and beans. My morale is at its lowest, 'cause job improvement is at its slowest. Yes, everywhere the staffing grumbling, man, this place is really crumbling. But laying all these things aside, I've tried to do my work with pride. 'Cause sink or swim, leave it, take it, this plate is only what we make it. I'll keep on trying and mostly winning to give these kids a new beginning. When they've learned to do their very best, then my reward is their success. Well, that's the way it is.